Hello, Vibe Gardeners. Today, in this episode of Vibe Gardening Informal Edition, we're going to go over something that I wish, as a beginner gardener, that I knew going forward, but I really didn't find a video quite like this in my journey. So today, I'm going to make that video for you about plant food 101. We'll talk about the nutrition of what plants need and how to read the nutrition label and how to make that work for you. So with that said, here we go. In this episode, we're going to talk about the nutritional needs of plants. And more specifically, for most fertilizer you'll purchase, you will find that they really focus on three elements that are considered what's called macronutrition. These are the nutrition that's needed by the plants in large amounts to be able to live and thrive. And the main ones we're talking about are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. There are three other macronutrients too that a plant needs, like calcium, sulfur, and magnesium. These are not as advertised much as these main three elements that we talk about: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, mainly known as NPK. And aside from that, there's also a lot of micronutrients that you'll see in this chart here. There are 22 elements, according to USDA, that really makes a plant thrive. And obviously, it's a lot if you want to do marketing. And most fertilizer really focuses on the NPK as the main advertisement, but you will see them really talk about all the micronutrition and macronutrition in their ingredient list. And kind of like humans, plants have different nutritional needs as they go through life, usually. And I'll go more into that in the latter sections. And another thing that we really want to talk about too is about the law of minimum. This is kind of where it really talks about the weakest link, as the diagram shows here with a bucket. This is a law that shows that if you want optimum yield from your crops, whether it be leaves, fruit, flower, whatever it is that you want from your plant, the maximum yield you can have from a crop is really dictated by the weakest link, which, as you can see here in this diagram, that nitrogen actually is the weakest link, not water, which even to me, when I was learning about this, it surprised me that nitrogen is actually more necessary for optimal. That doesn't mean it doesn't need the water, because obviously without water, a plant will die. I think we all know that, right? But that's for survival. But when it comes to optimal yields, which means the most bountiful harvest you will have, you will definitely want to make sure that your nitrogen is enough. And then, as you can see, phosphorus comes next, and then potassium next. And this is kind of like one of those interesting things that I think most gardeners don't realize. So to talk about plant nutrition, we're going to talk a little bit about how the labeling works, because to be able to read nutrition label is actually extremely important for being able to understand what you're buying and what you're applying to your plants. So here I have an array of both synthetic and organic nutrition that I use personally at home. You'll be able to find links to all these products on the links below, as well as all the information I was able to gather from here. What we have here, let's do some examples here. Let's start with the synthetic fertilizer. So Miracle-Gro, this is actually something that I'm not really getting paid to talk about them, but they're all over everywhere you go. Almost every nursery or garden center sells Miracle-Gro. So it's rather easy to see them, and a lot of marketing here gives the names that really, frankly, sometimes don't tell you truly what they do. So for example, this one's all-purpose. They also have the bloom booster, and they also have the tomato blend. So you might wonder, why is my tomato blend being really recommended for for example, my pepper? And really, we're going to dive into why these are the case. So let's get this label here. So first, with Miracle-Gro all-purpose, as you can see, I have a rather large container of it, which is one of the most useful, as we'll go into later on. This right here, according to the nutrition label, it says it has 24% nitrogen, 8% phosphate, and here actually it says explicitly available phosphate. We're going to go into why that is important later. And then soluble potash, which is potassium here. And they have also a bunch of other stuff down there, and those, as you will see, as we talked about earlier, the other stuff down below, they're less than 0.02%. Those are your micronutrients, and that's why there's such small percent. All of them are well under 1%. And for all the big ones here, we'll talk about nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium is 24% nitrogen, 8% phosphorus, and 16% potassium. So that would give you what's called the 24-8-16 NPK ratio. Because with NPK ratio, it really talks about the percent by volume by weight of that product in this container. So that's the Miracle-Gro. Then you go into this what's called the Arbor. This is the Arbor organic granular. Again, that for future video, I'll talk about where I use this and why I use this together with Miracle-Gro. And this one it has here on says total nitrogen is 3%. It talks about water soluble and water insoluble. Either way, it comes in at 3%. And then the phosphate or the phosphorus available phosphate is 2%. Soluble potassium is 1%. And then it has calcium, which is 8%. Magnesium 1.9, and the sulfur is 0.2%. And interestingly, here it talks about all the macronutrients, which are all 6 of them. But in reality, even in the front, right here, as you will see, it actually only advertises a 3-2-1, which really talks about the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, or the NPK ratio of this thing. And like I said, that's actually the most commonly marketed ratio for nutrition here. And so even with organic fertilizer, it does that. And so then this is my hydroponic solution, which once the season gets cooler, I will go indoors with my hydroponic, and we'll talk a lot more about it. And this one too advertises in the back. It's a lot less detailed. It only gives you really nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium here as a 3%, 1%, 2%, and give you 1.3% iron. And this is one of the less informative ones, but it's still focused on the 3:1:2 NPK ratio, which we'll go into a little bit later on, as I promised. And then finally, even this right here, this is the all famous worm casting. I got these at Costco. This is actually organic, or worm casting really translates down to really worm poop. And this is actually one of those extremely commonly used organic fertilizer as well. And again, we'll go into that in a future episode. Even this really gives you tells you right up front here that's 0.500. Actually, it's not very nutritious. It's only got 0.5% nitrogen, and nothing really else is in there. And they've got 0.3% iron, and yeah, and that really is a even with something as basic as worm casting, it's going to give you the basic NPK ratio in the front as advertisement. So hopefully that's going to give you a good array of look into how to read nutrition labels for your fertilizer, and hopefully that helps you. So the first element that we're going to really talk about is nitrogen. Nitrogen is extremely crucial for a plant because that is really kind of like the protein for humans. What it does is that it really kind of builds the bulk mass, kind of like these eggplants that I have here. And see how green these things are and how much leaves they build. So this is mostly due to the nitrogen I have fed it very early in life. This is extremely important as nitrogen is really kind of like that growth hormone, if you will, that all plant need in the beginning stage of their life, pretty much. I'm sure there are some exceptions, but almost all plants in their early development, they need that nitrogen to build mass. Once it gets a leaf, it can be able to photosynthesize, and that's really the main point of nitrogen: is give the plant the bulk it needs to photosynthesize properly. And so the way you can tell that a plant is deficient in nitrogen is if you see that the leaves are yellowing, and if you can actually also, it's one of the rare elements here that you can actually feed too much of and burn your plants. And when you see that you're burning them, you'll see them, they start burning and crisping on the edges, and actually eventually you can actually kill a plant using too much nitrogen because how fast nitrogen travels. As we'll get into the absorption section. So I will link right there a video from Epic Gardening by Kevin, where he kind of goes over an article that he posted on his website. He owns a gardening supply and seed company now, Botanic Interest, and he kind of goes over some of the key signals of deficiency in every nutrition a plant can have that we really know of. And the key nutrition that you can use in helping you get enough nitrogen is really this Miracle-Gro all-purpose fertilizer. This is the key for getting yourself enough nitrogen, because this right here is 24% nitrogen, 8% phosphate, and 16% potassium. So this right there is really a eightfold power of the 3-1-2 nutrition. So it's the ratio is three parts nitrogen, 1 part phosphorus, and 2 parts potassium. This is a very common blend for early plant development because of the need for, well, I'll get into it later on, but the high nitrogen really helps boost the growth that you see here. But it's also balanced enough that's going to be able to sustain all the other essential characteristics of a plant. So the next element we're going to talk about is phosphorus. Phosphorus is really for root development, and it really gets that energy going in the plants. What it really does is that it basically sucks, it gives that root, that gives a plant's ability to soak up all that nutrition in the soil. And as you can imagine, it's really, the root is essentially kind of like the digestive system of a plant. It lets it go down there and soak up everything you give it, which for us, as we fertilize our garden, that root system is the main conduit to which these plants can uptake their nutrition. So one of the things that you will see in plant, if there's deficiency, and you will see that they're really like you see a lot of purpling, especially when the weather gets cooler. You see purpling, and there is really kind of overall degradation of the plant health. So that's how you can know that the phosphorus is kind of low. And so other than that, like the way you really boost phosphorus is really with this Miracle-Gro bloom booster. And the reason that that's important is that when the plant is flowering, it needs to, basically like a pregnant woman, it needs to taking a lot of nutrition to basically be able to feed the baby that's developing within the plant. So this one has 15% nitrogen, 30% phosphate, and 15% potassium. And as you can see here, this really is a 1-2-1 blend. So you still need, all the 2 other ingredients or the other nutrients that you have on this bloom booster. But it really focuses on increasing the phosphorus in the blend to give the plant what it needs to get that good uptake from the soil. And that is also a very good signal to get your plants into that next stage of life, from the early development into the flowering phase and the fruiting eventually. So if you're finding that your plants are not getting to the next stage, like, I have a bunch of onions here. So these are like onion greens right here. As I was showing this image next to me here, these guys have not entered the next stage of their life. They're still in the green onion phase. The bulbs are really just elongated, and you can see that this is because I just finished feeding it the nitrogen phase. I've not given it that sort of biomechanical signal that you are ready to go into the bulbing phase. And that's why you see no bulb development, in that we didn't really switch to any of the other phases quite yet. And I give it a 2-week sort of low period to reset. So that's kind of what's happening here with the phosphorus. Is one of those things that you can help get that plant to the next stage and to kind of promote it into that development of the root and into the next phase of being reproductive. So the final element we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about potassium. Potassium is really a lot of the times misunderstood by a lot of gardeners, and it's one of those things that it really helps the health of the plant. It really is like the metabolic and the nervous system. Essentially, it kind of helps promote things going on there. It really boosts the enzymes in the plant, which are kind of proteins that actually gets the work done, transforms nutrients to whatever the plant needs to grow and do whatever it needs. So it actually controls the opening and closing of the pores of the plant. It also makes it be able to handle stress better. So if, example, it goes through a period of drought, overheat, or any kind of other stress, potassium is what helps regulate that stress behavior. And this is actually extremely important when you go on vacation, for instance, and you want your plant to kind of survive longer. Having the right amount of potassium, and later on we'll talk about aspirin as well, can really help it endure through some stress. But more particularly, when you end up buying fertilizer, it's going to be marketed as more of the fruiting phase of the plant because it all that enzyme production and the ability for it to get the work done of transforming nutrition to what's needed by the plants. You will see that it's mostly getting advertised as a fruiting blend here. With Miracle-Gro, it is literally just called tomato blend. That's all it says. But in reality, is that this is actually needed by any plant that's getting to the fruiting phase. And honestly, like I think tomato is one of the more marketable form of growing in most American gardens, and that's why Miracle-Gro really just tailors this marketing towards tomatoes only. And the nutrition here is 18% nitrogen, 18% phosphate, and 21% potassium. And it's probably one of the most balanced nutrition that we have so far. It really comes down to a 667 or no 66 yeah, so 667 ratio, which is actually quite balanced, almost like equal parts of everything, but it still focuses a little bit more on potassium. So it makes sure that the plant has enough nitrogen to be able to build more bulk, to be able to support that leafy growth, and then gives it enough phosphorus so they can the flowers can keep going, but at the same time to be able to regulate the enzyme production and getting everything transformed to what the fruit needs. It gives it a little bit more of a tiny little bit more boost on that potassium so that the fruit can get what it needs to get all the nutrition you need as a consumer of the produce of your tomato. And same thing for strawberries. Our eggplant's going to eventually go there. Basically, it's a very balanced diet. And honestly, if you're ever really confused about what nutrition your plant needs, something like this, a very balanced blend, is really kind of the go-to because you can't really, you're not really deficient on any one particular element. So this is basically all the major aspect of each one of these nutrition. So the final really topic that we want to talk about is absorption of these nutritions. Just because you're giving these nutrition to the plants doesn't mean they'll take it. Plants got feelings too. So what really want to talk about too is, so the main thing that we really care about is really the rate of which nutrition travels and get absorbed from soil. And so here from the University of the Montana State University Extension, they have this article that I've been referring to earlier with all those diagrams. This diagram really highlights the speed of which each of the NPK and all the other elements get absorbed by the soil. As you can see, nitrogen is one of the fastest absorbing elements within the soil. And whereas, like from their analogy here, phosphorus is the slowest in uptake. And then there's also potassium. So one of the things that we can tell is this is why it is actually possible and easy to burn your plants by giving it too much nitrogen. This is both for synthetic and organic fertilizer. No matter what form of nitrogen you give it, if you give it too much, your plants can get burned. And that's something that we're going to go into in a future episode. But when it comes to both potassium and phosphate, because of its slow transit speed, it is actually far less likely to burn your plants with it, almost impossible. And the other thing too is that it also kind of goes into the future episodes where we'll talk a little bit about responsible gardening, in that because of the slow transit of these elements, they can actually stay in the soil And due to the slow uptake from the plant themselves, they can actually contribute to things like runoff in the environment, which really is a big what's called contribution of pollution into our environment from us gardening. But in reality, these are things that really you gotta keep in mind of, because as you go on, you don't want to burn and kill your plants with too much of anything, right? So that's why we kind of talked a lot about nitrogen, and then really potassium and phosphorus, because of its slow absorption speed, is kind of unlikely for it to be deficient on it, but it can always give it a boost, which I do here regularly. And then the final thing that we want to talk about is that this is not all there is, right? There's also the actual root absorption of these things, but this is something that we can go into later on with the feeding schedule and how you can help feed your plants. But the root absorption is a little different from how the soil transit works, and it shows that really the macronutrition is absorbed much uh, more than any of the other micronutrition, because obviously that's why it's called macronutrition, right? And it's so high on the Liebig's law of minimum. But that is not all there is to it. There is also a lot of things like caching, anion exchange capability, as well as other things like how pH affects how the nutrition goes through the soil. So basically, the pH and the texture of the soil can also play a lot into it, and that's just really scratching the surface, literally, on the soil. And there's not enough time in this episode to go all over this. And so hopefully this is going to be the start of our introduction into nutrition. And I will likely post a lot more video on how to handle the information that you've gotten from this episode, because nutrition is a huge part of gardening, as all of you are probably aware of. And with that said, hopefully you got a lot out of this. And this is our first episode on nutrition. And let's go garden, guys.